Welcome, everyone, back to the Illusion of Consensus podcast. I'm here with Dr. Aruna Tummala. She's the founder of Trinergy Clinic, and she's a holistic psychiatrist. We had her on the podcast recently, and a lot of people enjoyed it and learned a lot of things. I learned a lot of things. Also worth quickly mentioning that Aruna and I are partnering up for the podcast, and so her clinic, Trinergy Health, will be sponsoring the podcast. Over the last few weeks, I've been looking at different podcast sponsors to support the show and things that I can support and vouch for and advocate for in good conscience, and not just do things for money and just sell snake oil, but things that I believe in. And her and I were chatting, and I've been chatting with other people as well. And so I'm really excited about that partnership. And so we're going to have a discount code. Aruna and I are going to talk more about it, but we'll provide that in the link below. And so in most podcasts moving forward for the next month or two, we'll be advertising Trinergy Health and providing a discount link for people who watch my show who are interested in working with Aruna or taking part in one of her holistic health programs. We can maybe describe briefly at the very end, but I'm excited about that partnership.
Me too. I think there is definitely an alignment in terms of our philosophy, our thinking, and our vision, and definitely the mission that what you're doing and what I'm doing. There's a lot of confluence points, and I'm very happy to be partnering with you as well, Raf.
Yeah, great. Before we jump into the audience questions, I was thinking about a few things from our last conversation, and we spent like 2.5 hours and felt like we could go for another 10 hours if we wanted to. And I'm very interested in mental health. I'm relaunching my original personal Substack. I'm calling it now the Meta Mystic, which is going to be about my personal reflections, observations, journeys with mental health, struggling with things like anxiety, loneliness, isolation, agency. After graduating high school, I had a bit of a depressive period, which was, partly the pandemic and loneliness and trying to find myself and discovering who I am, my identity, my place in this world, my purpose, things like that. And so, mental health, like any word, any term, is inherently reductionistic, right? Like mental health, like there's so many parts of mental health, right, that relate to it. And I'm increasingly realizing as I read more things, write more things, talk to more people like you, that there's so many things that contribute to mental health, and things like sunlight, things like family, people around you, social life. Are you doing things for fun? How much are you laughing? Like, how much are you getting out and doing fun things to just have a good time without any purpose? And then obviously exercise, nutrition, and now people are, sauna, cold plunge. People are doing all kinds of new things, supplements. People are interested in things like adaptogens, like lion's mane mushrooms, ashwagandha, magnesium, vitamin D, vitamin B complex, things like that. Nutrition, cooking, obviously what you're consuming in terms of whole foods, sleep, meditation, yoga, all kinds of things, right? And so as I'm thinking more and more about these things, I highly recommend people listen to the last conversation, because we hit on so many different things about mental health and things that you recommend. And we talked a lot about nutrition and mental health as it intersects with physical health and things we put into our bodies. And you were talking about your methodology of diet, trauma, and toxins, which was very interesting. Yeah. One just broader reflection and question that I was thinking about for you was, what role do you place, what emphasis, if at all, do you put on things like psychotherapy, broadly speaking, say people reflecting on their life and noticing their behavior patterns and how they're behaving, what kind of emotions they're having? And you can do this, hopefully with a high quality psychotherapist. You can also do it in journaling, which I've learned over the past few years. Jordan Peterson and others highly recommend journaling. I find it to be an incredible exercise of just like one page, double spaced, a lined piece of paper, and just, one problem of like, oh, I'm really struggling to make new friends. I'm really struggling these days with letting go of outcomes, and just do like one page on that. And I find that to provide incredible amount of clarity and just really help unlock certain unconscious patterns we fall into. I guess I can, for people who might not have thought about this at all, like for me, I struggle a lot in life with letting go of outcomes and like playing my part, but then sort of letting go and letting things happen. A lot of people
Yeah,
struggle with that. I'm not
surrender.
the only one.
Yeah.
And so with psychotherapy, I have a really good psychotherapist. We've done a lot of
Hmm.
work over the last couple of years in with that, and that's contributed to, I guess, me developing more agency and freedom. And
Hmm.
sometimes in life, if I'm stuck, if I want a certain thing, whether that's career, relationship, social life, pretty much anything, oftentimes I've gotten stuck with those things of like, man, I really want this thing and I'm not getting it, but I've tried, and there's a sense of like, what more can I do? Maybe I can do more. But when I journal, I've increasingly used this tool, and then I'm like writing down, okay, here's the problem. I really want this outcome in my career and it's not happening. And then write down, okay, what have I done? Okay, I've done this. I reached out to this person. I made this call. I've done this message. I've put out this article, this podcast. And then in my case, frequently what I realize is like, maybe there's a couple more things I could do, but largely I've sort of done what needs to be done. And what needs to be done now is just letting go and taking a deep breath. And without the journaling, without the self reflection that I've learned through that and through psychotherapy, without doing any of those things, I would just be an anxious, overthinking mess, wondering what more can I do, and falling into that trap. So you're a psychiatrist, you care about mental health. Obviously, like I said, we touched on a lot of different things about mental health, and we're going to get into more different niche topics relating to mental health. But what emphasis do you put on things like what I just talked about when it comes to changing your behavior patterns and thought patterns?
Okay, to begin with, I mean that's a really nice question, and it's a multi-part answer. So let me just organize my thoughts a little bit here, and I want to start off by saying that it's really good that we are having this conversation today, May 1st, and May is supposedly Mental Health Awareness Month. I mean, for me as a psychiatrist, every day is Mental Health
All year.
Awareness. It is all year, but it's good that we are getting. I mean, there's special emphasis this month, and I'm really happy to be kicking off our partnership as well as having this conversation with you in the month of May. Now, having said that, to going back to your question, so what exactly is psychotherapy? To put it, I mean, very, very simply, psychotherapy or the role of a therapist was something that was filled in by different members of society for a growing child or a young adult. What I mean by that, we've heard the saying, it takes a village to raise a child. We hear that, right? So what, I mean, at least in tribal communities or in very closed communities, smaller communities back in the day, what would happen is that it would be like if somebody's going through some sort of a struggle, they would reach out to, it could be their parents, but if the parents are not being of help, then it could be a cousin, it could be an uncle, it could be an aunt, or it could be a grandparent, or maybe it could be the neighbors next door living. So it was so that is, but as society, especially modern society, has become so fragmented and isolated, even in India, joint family systems have become more nuclear family systems, and here in the West, we see more and more isolation. Even within families, too, as that is happening, therapists and psychotherapy has become an outsourcing of these kinds of roles that were filled in by family members, loved ones, and neighbors, and other members of society. So the concept of needing somebody to run your problems by, or to get advice, or to, air your ideas, needing a sounding board, that was a human need all
Mm-hmm.
along. We were never ever were we supposed to handle any life's problems or situations all by ourselves. That would
Mm.
always lead to. And in fact, the best psychotherapy books are, if you ask me, it's the Bhagavad Gita, it's the Bible. I haven't read the Quran, but I've read pieces and excerpts of Bhagavad Gita and the Bible both. So I would definitely say, I mean, if you look, especially the Bhagavad Gita was really, you could consider that as a dialogue between a patient and a therapist, Krishna being the psychotherapist and Arjuna being
Mm.
the client. He's having a big major crisis and he doesn't know what to do. He's beset with guilt, with sadness, and he's basically paralyzed with anxiety. And then his therapist, quote unquote, Lord Krishna, guides him, never tells him do this or do that, just explains to him what is right action, how to look at all of these things, and what is the right thing, and that he has free will and free choice, and only the warrior Arjuna can make those decisions for himself. And there is no right or wrong, but each and every decision will have its own set of consequences that is ultimately responsible for. So so to me, I mean, I do see, and you see so many of such dialogues even in the Bible, and all of those, all these directives that are there in these religious and spiritual textbooks. They're not really about, I mean, if you ask me, this is my opinion, it's less about religion and, all of that, but it is more about guiding us in living life in such a manner that we experience more wholeness, more togetherness, more joy, and more love.
I agree. And the process of transformation is what I'm so interested in, which
correct.
multiple religions
correct.
outline in similar and different ways, and so that's where it gets interesting, right? Like say Buddhism versus Christianity, for example, very different things. Some areas of alignment, some areas of divergence, for sure.
Yeah. Because I mean, think about it. I mean, in the same way, like even in psychotherapy, we have Freudian psychotherapy, we have Jungian psychotherapy, then we have cognitive behavior therapy, we have family systems oriented. There are so many different schools, but ultimately the goal is to bring about wholeness and ease within the person that is using any of these modalities. And it's the same thing. I think that's the first thing that I would say, that, first of all, human suffering is nothing new. We've always had it. And we've always needed somebody to guide us throughout humanity. And now, of course, psychotherapy is happening in a more structured form, and there are many, many benefits to it. But ultimately, psychotherapy, what happens in the psychotherapeutic relationship is less about the technique and the process, but it is more about the relationship that is established. That is it doesn't matter what school of therapy you follow, but your client is going to find benefit and a positive outcome. And much of that positive outcome depends on the quality of the relationship that you're able to inspire your client. That's something to remember. It really is less about the technique or the skill, but it is really, all of this happens in the medium of that human to human relationship. That's the most important thing to remember about psychotherapy.
Okay. And so your general thoughts on psychotherapy, do you have, like you said, there's a lot of benefits, you think? Are you concerned about certain aspects of psychotherapy?
The only thing that I'm concerned about is that how should I say this? This is somewhat controversial. See, to me, ultimately, psychotherapy is it is about becoming familiar with our thoughts that are causing us problems, and then how those thoughts are leading to certain actions and choices, and then how those actions and choices give rise to certain experiences and emotions that we experience.
And where those thoughts come from, which past experiences, which traumas, which oftentimes
goes back to
you go on a journey and you're like, oh my God, that thing from like second grade is the reason why, or part of the reason why I'm like doing things the way I am. It's like, what the hell? It's crazy.
That is correct. It goes back to that subconscious programming, typically that happens when we were children. Yes, all of that is true. But ultimately, what psychotherapy is about changing our behavior, our patterns of thinking, feeling, and acting, which is learning. Because even for a psychotherapy or any kind of change in our neurological system to be successful, we have to break away old neuronal connections. So let's say that there's a trigger word that you have, and somebody says that word. Let's say you hate being called selfish, and somebody says that to you, and immediately your response is to get angry and explode. Let's say that that's your pattern, not yours, but hypothetically. Now you want to change that, and you seek out a therapist. So what needs to happen, what actually in successful therapy, what happens is that the neurons that were connected together in your brain that would get fired up every time you heard the word selfish, and that would trigger your amygdala, again a neuronal connection that would then give rise to that emotional response. All of this is different sets of neurons banding together and firing together in unison. That has to be broken up, and a new set of neuronal connections where you're hearing the word, but that is making you take a pause. You're actually, rather than bursting out an emotion, you're actually taking a deep breath. So a different set of neurons are being activated that remind you and send the signal to your nervous system to take a deep breath and hold it in and then relax and sigh. So, and then respond to the situation with a question rather than erupting in emotion. This means that there is actually unlearning and relearning that is happening. But for this process of
Yeah.
unlearning and relearning to happen, you need a nutritionally repleted state. You cannot be nutritionally deficient. You cannot be inflamed and you cannot be toxic. That's my only thing with so the
Yeah.
first thing, whether it's anxiety, and especially with children, anxiety or ADHD, and then we say, oh, maybe they need a therapist. No, first we need to take care of the needs of the body. Let's see, are they having vitamin deficiencies? Are they having any inflammation, gut issues, microbiome things? What about, their toxicity? Are they consuming, thankfully, finally, artificial dyes have been banned, but artificial dyes have been linked to ADHD in boys and anxiety in kids. These studies came out in the 70s. So, we got to ask those questions. And yes, even though maybe the very important factor for ADHD could be those artificial dyes, but those dyes and other factors in the environment resulted in an ADHD pattern of neuronal behavior. And
Yeah.
therapy can unpack that. But it's just going to be easy if we first detox from the dyes, give the missing nutrients, reduce inflammation, teach them some of these self-regulation skills, which can also happen in therapy. And then
Yeah.
address the thoughts, the actions, and the behaviors, and emotional expression. All of that can then happen in therapy. But without addressing the needs of the body, when we jump into therapy, it's, in my experience, in my observation, I don't see that working very well.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
so
No, that makes sense. And it's sort of an impossible question at times of like the chicken or the egg, which comes first. But
I mean,
yeah.
yeah, see, based on this, I mean, as I was observing this, I began to realize that, when somebody is like in a very highly inflamed and toxic state, when they're coming in, I cannot even tell them, like, it's like somebody's anxious and tell them, take a deep breath, okay, chill, relax. It's not going to land. It's like even a child that is hungry, you cannot teach them math. You first have to feed them and then teach them math. Because even though they could be listening, they're not having ADHD or anything, if they're hungry, their brain is not going to receive and process and learn the information. It's the same thing with therapy, is how I see it. So that's one feedback. I mean, that's one way that I understand, that you first have to, and then life becomes easy. Like, because even to learn and even to practice meditative skills or to calm your nervous system, we need functioning adrenals, which depend on vitamin D, always comes up in all of these things, but also iron and B vitamins. Our adrenals need all of that. And mitochondria, for anything, even to think or to even to pause or to hold your emotion in, all of this requires mitochondria. Even to blink, to speak, everything requires mitochondria. And mitochondria are extremely energy. They make energy, ATP, for all the cells, and they are reliant on iron, B vitamins, vitamin D, and oxygen. So when we're not providing that, and we are trying to just tell them, okay, this is how you need to behave, or this is
Mm.
how you should think, it puts a lot more stress, if you ask me. And so in line with this insight that I had, I began to, so in my practice, we talked about my program. It's a 6-month program. And the first month I tell people, don't worry about meditation, don't worry about therapy or any of that. Just focus on eating right, take your supplements, let's start the detox process. And in the second month is when I introduced the concepts of, and the big thing for me, as far as, the big goal for me when I do psychotherapy, is to teach people self-connection, self-love, and self-worth. That becomes the bedrock of everything else. And that's the approach that I take.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. That makes sense. I would love to go deeper into that and learn more and um, understand that connection of how nutrition feeds mental health. Um, I think I've been very focused from the other side, of how, just how mental health just contributes to everything in your life. And I think to some degree this is maybe a radical or a controversial opinion, but I think at this point, just with my personal explorations and seeing other people in life, I think some level of, you could say both these things, and they're both different things, but like therapy and mindfulness meditation, I feel like those are sort of universally, like everyone should at some point learn those things and like do those things, in the sense of like,
Oh yeah.
in the sense of, and I use the word therapy, and I would, we were talking about how society's changed. I would say, and I don't know if you disagree with this, but I would say, while there is something to, and this is Abigail Schreier. She wrote a book on bad therapy
Mhm.
last year.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
agreed with some parts of
I
it, and I
do.
disagreed with other parts of it. So, sorry, what were you gonna say?
I actually have not read the book, but I've heard her speak about her ideas and some of the things that she's saying. I mean, I do think that there is a component of over therapeuticizing. I mean, everything because see, because and the problem with that is not per se the therapy. The problem is the way therapy delivery is structured, especially in the US, because it's tied into insurance systems. So anytime you want to get paid through insurance for therapy, you need a diagnosis, and that's where the labeling and the diagnosis and all of that, because otherwise the whole system, the whole medical industrial complex will break down. They've taken the good of therapy and then it gets corrupted with these things, because you cannot just say, oh, this child just needs a little bit of attention, a little bit of understanding, that if for whatever reason they're not getting it in their family. I mean, we have two stressed out parents with the other children to attend to, and it's okay. I mean, that used to happen. I mean, there is no guilt or shame in this on anybody's part, because that's what used to happen. I mean, in joint family systems, again, I don't want to, there were a lot of problems. And I mean, see, every system will have its problems, but one of the benefits of having ancillary people in your in to parent your child, is that, when you are stressed out as a primary caregiver, you can hand over your baby or your child to somebody else, somebody of course that you trust, because you've lived with them and you know them, and you can do that. It's not complete outsourcing. And then there is a give and take, there is a back and forth between the primary caregiver and this ancillary caregiver, all of that. And now we definitely think of therapists as fulfilling that role. But when with the medical industrial complex and the insurance industry and reimbursement and all of those comes in, then there is, as a parent, I can tell you that one of the things that really bothers me is the, not only as a parent, even as a psychiatrist, is the complete barrier that gets established between especially the child and the parent. Like if the child is in therapy, then there is the privacy laws, and in it, I mean, I'm not a child psychiatrist. I do see children from time to time, and it's a very delicate balance where you don't want to tell on the child all the time. That's not the idea at all. But at the same time, these issues of privacy and how much should the parent know, and what are the rights of the parent versus the rights of the child, all of these things gets a little murky. And I'm not saying here that I have all the answers to these situations, and there can never be any standard answer. Everybody should be very mindful of these potential landmines and be careful as to how you address it in each individual situation. And and the only thing I say, I mean, both in personal and professional life, the only question we need to ask is that, how is this benefiting this child or this person who is the care receiver? How to benefit that person and that child in this given scenario? So, what is in the best interest of this person and this child in this scenario? That's the question that we need to ask ourselves and guide our actions and behaviors towards that. So,
Yeah, yeah. One of the things I did agree with Abigail, when she was doing a bunch of podcasts and criticizing therapy culture, was that the best treatment. I forget if this was her opinion or if she was quoting therapists that she was talking to. But she said that the best treatment for a child's mental health issues, whether anxiety, OCD, anorexia, depression, whatever, is treating the parent. And that's a very holistic way of looking at it, and that definitely rings true. Oftentimes when the child is struggling with these things, although you know what, it's interesting. there's actually a sort of a counter example to that too, of like Sam Harris. He has a great meditation app, which I use all the time for learning non-duality, Advaita Vedanta, advanced meditation stuff. And his wife also teaches some stuff in the app. And his wife, they're both neuroscience background. Her wife has a new book on consciousness out, audiobook. But she was talking about how in her podcast with Lex Friedman, how after the birth of both of their daughters, she had postpartum depression, which is a question we're going to get into. And she just, her and, her husband, like they, worked on themselves quite a bit. And then they had daughters, and their daughters struggled a lot with panic attacks. And, I mean, we're not living in their household. We don't know everything that's going on, but presumably, her and Sam seem to be in a very good place, and don't seem the kind to be, fighting all the time or yelling or whatever, and stuff like that. But nonetheless, despite, their meditative practices and certain principles they have that are adapted from Eastern philosophies, things like that, they're both or one of their daughters struggled a lot with panic attacks, and I've heard Annika talk about that, and it's like it's not really, it doesn't seem to be a matter of like treating the parent. It's just for whatever reason and she talked about how when she was a kid, she struggled with panic attacks, and I forget, she might have been speculating if there was some epigenetic thing going on of like when she was a kid, she struggled with it. If that, I'm not an epigenetic expert, but if there was some sort of carryover epigenetic transmission, things like that. But so I do think, generally speaking, treating the parents is important. And oftentimes when a child is really struggling with obsessive thinking, anxiety, oftentimes the parents are also struggling with that. But also, secondly, when I look back to when I was a kid, and my parents, they immigrated from India, a lot of stress, a lot of financial burden, cultural change, things like that. So that, they definitely needed more help, or if they were in a better situation financially and mentally, and everything would have been better. But at the same time, I look back and I wish there was some really good resource or therapist, something that I wish I learned at that time to work through my irrational fears and thoughts. And only recently, like therapy takes a long time too, by the way. It's not I wish it was a quicker fix than it was, but recently there's just so many aspects to mental well-being. And just recently, like I wrote down in a page a few months ago, maybe, of like all the irrational fears I've had since I was a kid. And that list is long, and that list is just crippling, debilitating fears. And like 99% of them, there's like nothing there. Like it was never going to happen. Fears about health, like, oh, I might, I have this little pain in my leg, and I thought I had cancer for a year. I just like walked around thinking I had cancer and like parents were stressed out, they were struggling, so they couldn't really deal with it, and they're not therapists, and so like, how do you deal with that? It's you could tell a kid like, oh, don't worry about it, you're fine, and like that can kind of help short term, but the pattern of fear and anxiety, right? So I really see a room for high quality therapy to be more accessible and more available to people struggling. But at the same
See,
time, you have to acknowledge that parents and family and the whole holistic environment, and you're mentioning nutrition as well, also play a role in these things.
that's why, I mean, looking at all of these things, see, what happens is that you have to have a holistic approach. It's not just nutrition, it's not just parenting style, it's not just culture, it's not just genetics, it's all and more. So, and in looking at all of these factors, that's where the system that I've come up with, diet, trauma, toxins, that really encapsulates everything. Because when we're talking about, and it's actually diet slash lifestyle, so I'm really looking at everything that's happening. How is this child or adult, how are they eating, how are they sleeping, when what are their relationships like, what are the stress management skills like, and then trauma, that takes us back to how we relate to our own self, and also how are we relating to others in this world, and what is our expectation from the past, from the future, all of those things. That's what trauma represents to me in my philosophy. And the third one is toxins. That plays a big role that people unfortunately don't recognize. So, and when we talk about anxiety, and you're mentioning Sam Harris, and I was not aware of this, I've not listened to those podcasts. And people don't realize that the role that environmental toxins play in causing these syndromes. And it's not just the artificial dyes. It's another controversial thing, vaccines. We have to take a look at the toxins that are introduced with the current CDC schedule of vaccinations. I think there was another, Paul Thomas did a study that was published in 2020, and the study was unfortunately retracted. I couldn't understand why it should be retracted, but it's still available on the internet. He's a pediatrician in Oregon. He's a holistic pediatrician, and all he did was took a look at 10 years of kids that came into his practice, divided, and it was an independent third-party group that did the study. They came into his practice, looked at the charts, they looked at and divided all the kids over 10 years into fully vaccinated, partially vaccinated, and unvaccinated kids. And they compared the rates of different diseases. And without a doubt, anxiety, neurobehavioral syndromes, depression, ear infections, eczema, atopic dermatitis, they were all increased in the fully vaccinated and the partially vaccinated as opposed to the unvaccinated group. So we have to be looking at that. And,
Yeah.
Anthony
And that's the question, is that correlation or causation? We need to look into that, right?
At this point, I mean, this study, it was a retrospective longitudinal follow-up study. So it's they probably were looking at correlation, but if you look at those graphs, that, especially as a parent, that is enough for me to give me pause. As a physician, as a psychiatrist, I don't know how I think of both being a mother as well as a physician. That study definitely was, even if there is, because, we are introducing an intervention, a medical intervention at a very tender age for no reason at all. We are not vaccinating sick people. We are vaccinating kids that don't have any problems, babies. And then and if you're doing that, if you're introducing a medical intervention, that has the potential to create a lot of financial benefit to some entity. And we are doing this to perfectly healthy, normal kids and babies, then we better have absolute proof that there is no harm that is being caused.
Yeah.
That's where I come from as a mother. That's where I come from. So in studies like this, and even Anthony Mawson's study, that I haven't looked at it yet, I've just read some highlights about it. But that was done, that just published recently in the last 3 to 4 weeks. So we have to look at the role of toxins. We have to look at the role of, and it's not about blaming the parents in any of these situations, but when I talk about trauma and we are talking about children, what I really mean is the child being raised in a manner that allows the child to express herself or himself in an authentic manner? Are they allowed to be who they are? It's that authenticity piece. And children always sacrifice authenticity for attachment. That's just an evolutionary mechanism. What do I mean by that? So if a child feels that if they say what they truly think, or if they do what they really, really want to do, then they will displease their main love, which is their parent. That their parent will get angry if they're authentic. Every child will sacrifice their authenticity for the sake of attachment. But that, in the long run, does not help the child.
And what do you mean by attachment here?
Attachment is the relationship between the child. It's a term that is used in child psychology mainly, that denotes the strength of the relationship between the parent and the primary caregiver, typically the parent, mother and father.
Right. But in this context, you're saying so they'd rather be inauthentic and maintain an attachment to the parents rather than be authentic and then
No, that's not what the parent is actually doing, but that is because of survival, because it's an evolutionary survival mechanism. So children instinctively will suppress their authenticity. They will sacrifice their authenticity to not displease their parent.
Yeah.
That automatically happens, which means that parents have to be that much more aware and sensitive. And some children, it'll be, you yell at them, you scold them, it's water off a duck's back. Nothing affects them. Some children are like that. But some children will be more sensitive to I hear some parents say, oh, all I had to do was look at him and he would shape up. Right? We hear that.
Yeah. That's another factor too. And because I I wish it wasn't the case, although you can never you can never say those things, because if you if you wish you were a different way, then you might not have the things that you like about yourself too. But
Right.
I would consider myself more on the sensitive side, and like I had a conversation with a friend once, and we had similar experiences growing up and similar kinds of struggles, but he has not had the struggles with crippling anxiety or just a number of other struggles that I've
So
had.
his struggles
And he,
were water off a duck's back. He
pardon?
was just able,
Yeah,
his struggles were water off a duck's back. He was able to just brush it off. Yeah, that depends on the temperament of the child, no doubt about that. But when it comes to attachment versus authenticity, every child will sacrifice authenticity for the sake of attachment. That's just an evolutionary survival mechanism. And so it's not that parents are bad, but it's that we because we, especially in our nuclear family systems, we are pulled in so many different directions that we overlook it. I mean, I'm guilty of it as a parent myself. And because you just want them to eat their breakfast and get ready for school and get out the door and be done with it, right? You just want things done. And if a child is having some other need at that point in time, and you can't be late, so because everything goes haywire at that point. And I mean, these are just everyday things that as a parent, we all go through that. And how do we balance that? And I don't want any parent listening to this feeling guilty and oh, I've done that. It's not that. It's the moment we recognize that, how do we show up in that instance? It's not about, nobody can go back and fix anything that has happened in the past. And it's not that if you did that a few times, you have harmed your child forever. That's also not what I'm saying.
yeah,
I'm just explaining some of the evolutionary survival mechanisms that happens, which can result to inauthenticity, which basically can also manifest as people pleasing, anxiety. All of these are coming from a place
yeah,
of not being comfortable who we truly are. When you have to have a persona for the world and a persona for yourself, and the two are very, very different. It's an act that we put on, and then you get tired of acting. That's depression. So,
yeah,
so
yeah,
these are.
yeah. That totally makes sense to me. And two more things on this quickly, and I'll get your thoughts on this, and then we'll move on to the audience questions. But two things. One, first of all, just like I assume, like if you have a patient struggling with serious depression, and I understand your approach for, it sounds like for pragmatic reasons, you want to focus at one thing at a time, and so you say 1 month, focus on gut healing and not worry about meditation or therapy. Then afterwards, you go into some of these things. But for people who are really struggling with depression and it's manifesting in their relationships, their social life, or PTSD, anxiety, OCD, whatever, do you generally recommend any kind of rigorous psychotherapy, which unfortunately does take a lot of time? As I said, like it takes a long time to unwind those things. I know, sounds like you teach some things, like you mentioned self-love, self-worth, self-connection, things like that, which sound great. And then so the second part I was going to say was about Joe Dispenza's work, which we mentioned last time, which me and my buddy were doing his course, The Formula.
Mhm.
And it's interesting. It's sort of like just an extension of the psychotherapy I've done the last couple of years, but
Correct.
it's less focused on the past, which he has some interesting ideas about that. I saw him on Diary of a CEO, Dispenza, talk about the interviewer Stephen Bartlett was asking, like, is the first part like understanding the past, and then he was saying like, yeah, but then he's very focused also on creating the future self, and he has this very interesting theory which I'm waiting to test out and see how it works, of like basically training your nervous system to have experiences that you want in life, to be the person you want to be before you actually have those experiences or get the thing that you want, whether it's the amazing relationship or marriage you want, or the career you want, the profession that you want, whatever. So it's sort of a more future oriented thing.
See, but
But
the only thing is,
but it does relate to, but I do see this still the necessity of going back through a lens of self-compassion and understanding things that happened in the past. And I mean, I sort of wish to be proven wrong on that. Like if there's some kind of like, do this 1 month thing, some kind of hypnosis or whatever, or even, take this new drug that we found out, and then in 1 month you'll unwind, or you gain some kind of magical power. Maybe there's some like future technology where in 1 month you find out, you put on some brain scan, and then it'll give you your whole life script, your whole unconscious patterning.
So
It'll make like a 10-page. This is a really cool tangent I'm going on. But
let me
like,
respond
you,
to
you,
that.
you,
Let me.
you could imagine like some technology in the future. I'm not saying it'll happen, but like in 1 month, it'll
It's
generate
not,
like a
but
10-page
the
document of like
only
all your unconscious and subconscious beliefs, and then there's some modality where you can then
only
rewire those things. But
technology.
currently, we're not there yet.
No, the only technology and the only machine that we have is our own mind body system. This is the only technology. This is the only machine that we have. So, what was your first question?
About
Would I
like,
recommend
would you recommend
psychotherapy?
therapy
Yeah,
for, like,
would
for
I
people
recommend
like struggling,
psychotherapy?
who are like really struggling with a lot of traumas
See,
and behavior patterns, which are hard to change? Behavior is very hard to change, as you probably know.
that's not true. That's
That's not true.
I know. I mean, I can give you tons of examples. I mean, just yesterday, I had a patient that I had worked with. She's actually in her 60s, and I saw her from March or April of last year for about 6 months. So she did my 6-month program. She came to me with a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, a postmenopausal onset bipolar disorder, lifelong history of irritable bowel syndrome since she was a teenager or something like that, and allergies. She had spring allergies, spring and summer allergies. And the big thing that really prompted her to seek treatment, was she was estranged from her son, adult son, and his family. He didn't want to talk to her because every spring and summer she would have this hypomanic episode and she would make everybody's life miserable. And nobody wanted to be around her anymore. And she was in her 60s. She was written off, she's not going to change. And this is bipolar. There's no help. And basically the son, out of a lot of frustration, he decided that it was better for him and his family's mental health to not interact with her. And her husband too. When they both came, they're the elderly couple. I shouldn't say elderly. They're very, very healthy, otherwise healthy people in their 60s. And they were. The husband was also very exhausted in having to kind of manage everything, try to soothe everybody's emotions in the house around her, and still understanding his wife's pain and all of that stuff. And what I found is that her hypomanic episodes were happening only in spring and summer. And one of the things that I figured out is that it was because of the amount of steroids that she was taking in spring and summer for her allergies. So that was the first thing, that we needed to, treat her allergies. And so again, it was the same framework: diet, trauma, toxins. And then everybody has, she also had some issues from her childhood. We are talking about 50 years ago. And that gave rise to a pattern of behavior that made her get into these kinds of interpersonal issues with close members. She was a very, very loving mother and grandmother, but some of her behavioral patterns were getting her into these deep, deep problems. And she did the program. She was very, very diligent. And the first thing that we saw is that last summer she didn't have any of her allergies. And the husband did a video review for me describing the change that he saw. And he was a very, very caring and supportive husband. Every year he would keep a stock of her inhalers and cetirizine and all these medications. And in the review, he's asking me, what should I do? I have 3 months supply of these medicines. And I told him, donate it to Doctors Without Borders or someplace like that. And then one issue that was not resolved, she and her husband, her behavior changed. And her husband told me that she was as loving and sweet as she was in her teens when they both fell in love. They were high school sweethearts. But the proof in the pudding is, what's happening with her son, right? And it has taken some time. And it wasn't like this behavior change was not a fake change. It was not a superficial change. And she made many overtures to working with her, trying to get her son to come and meet with her. He lives in a different city, and it wasn't happening. They actually went to another family wedding, and the son was not interested in talking to her, even at a neutral place like a cousin's wedding. All of this was happening, but she persisted in the new person that she had become. It was not faking. It was not superficial. She made that change. And yesterday she came to pick up a couple supplements. I have not seen her in over 6 to 8 months. And I mean, after she completed the program, there was no need for me to see her. But she does come and pick up supplements every few months. And she came in with a wide, big smile on her face. And she said that her son actually invited her to his home, and they had the most wonderful vacation with them. She got to meet her grandchild, the second one, who's now a year old, and everything. And and most importantly, her allergies did not come back. And she has truly become, I won't say she's become a new person. No, she's given up her anxieties. She's given up her fears. She's given up all of all of that false persona that she was basically fighting with everyone. But that was just a defense that she had developed because of.
How did she change that? I'm confused. Like, what did she do to change?
I mean, it's really about building. I mean, so many times it was just redirecting her to self-love and self-worth. Yeah, and also using Dr. Dispenza's concepts and his teachings. So it does not take long, and no age is too old. No age is too old for this. But so it's like this. The way to think about this is that it just needs to click in your mind as to what you need to do, how you need to be, who you need to become. So I was going to say, with regard to Dr. Dispenza's, you mentioned he talks about becoming the person, or experiencing the emotions of the future, and that will come. It's not about faking it. It cannot be a superficial, like you're feeling really anxious, but you're having the behaviors and the motions of a very abundant person. That's not what it is. It's about truly becoming that down to your core. So it's really shedding all these false identities, these false layers that we put on just to survive in the world. It's about moving. I mean, it's no longer about survival. It's about really becoming so completely whole and accepting of your own self, which also brings in the shadow work. So what this patient had to do, I think, if I were to say, is that she had to accept that she made some mistakes, and people being angry with her is okay. Doesn't make her a bad person for that. When it's also the shadow work. It's the shadow integration.
The shadow work is critical.
We all have light and dark sides. And the only person that can integrate that is us. And when we integrate that, when we fall in love with our own monster, then the monster becomes quiet.
Yeah. And you guided her through this, or did she do some kind of therapy or some journaling or stuff? Or
it's, I mean, these are basically, it really just needs to click for a person. And the way, I mean, and any therapist can do that. I won't say that I'm the only one that is, great at doing this. But a lot of experienced therapists will be able to do this. And the thing that needs to happen to be able to create this kind of a powerful shift is the insights as to how to do that comes from each patient's experiences. Like when people come in, like she was talking about what was happening, obviously she was looking at the situation from one angle. And in therapy, I was able to open that up and get her to take responsibility for her side and develop empathy for the other person's side. And then accept your own, take responsibility. You're not a victim. So a lot of these concepts become merged in this kind of a work. And but the core things, again, goes back to what I'm doing is getting people to connect with themselves, mind, body, and soul, and reconciling their light and dark sides, fully accepting themselves and their lives, and becoming responsible for their own self and their life. That's it. It doesn't take long. And also, I will tell you, we talked about OCD, you brought up OCD and anxiety. The reason why I insist on gut health and the detoxification is that consistently I've seen that without psychotherapy, when we heal the body, or when the process of healing begins, many of my patients with OCD experience 30 to 40% reduction in OCD symptoms simply by taking the supplements and changing their diet. That's how important it is.
Wow.
This has happened over and over again. Like so many patients, I would think, okay, maybe I need to send them for exposure and response prevention, but then I don't need to do that. And it's not, and again, I'm not saying that I do all the therapy all the time. No, many of my patients come with their own therapists, and that's always a blessing. then I reach out. I work with those therapists to make sure that we are on the same page, that we are not confusing the patient. Once that is done, I create these little shifts. I teach people how to pivot in their thinking, in their attitudes, and in their behaviors. And then they take up the rest with their, and I agree with Dr. Dispenza. I mean, I've also realized like once I started to understand what trauma was doing, I would say, I would tell my patients, and I still do, you can talk about your past in one session, maybe 1.5 or 2 sessions at the most. After that, we are leaving the past behind. We're only focusing on the present, not even so much on the future. How are you going to show up in the present? You can barf out your past once, but it's not going to happen again and again. If it happens, it is your responsibility to understand how your past is showing up and how to put your past again back where it belongs in the past.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. Everything you're saying makes sense, but this last part though, I do, I have an open mind, and I'm investigating these things in my personal life, most importantly, and then also, interviewing people, reading things, educating myself. But I understand, like you're not a psychotherapist, so that's not what you're doing 24/7. You're one person, you're a holistic doctor, and so you can't, if someone needs to spend seven
The
sessions on
original
trauma.
psychoanalyst was a
Pardon?
psychiatrist. The original psychotherapy was started by a psychiatrist. I mean,
Yeah.
Freud was the father of
Okay.
psychoanalysis. He was a
Yeah.
psychiatrist. Psychotherapy, I mean, I actually think that the field of psychiatry included psychotherapy. I've had a lot of psychotherapy training in my psychiatry training in residency, both in India as well as here.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I mean, of course, again, it's because of insurance. Psychiatrists became pill prescribers, and psychotherapy was then outsourced to therapists. I don't practice like that. I mean, to me, so that's why it's always that's the holistic approach. It's mind, body, and soul. And psychotherapy deals with the mind and the soul.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and I understand from your practice and all the different, like, you have such a broad base of knowledge, and obviously you're focused a lot on nutrition, supplements, things like that, and so I understand for pragmatic reasons, and even I could see some benefit of, like you said, you spend one session on your past, and then we sort of move forward. But when it comes to some very deep rooted, I guess, call it trauma, small t trauma or big T trauma, that doesn't strike me as at all a possible avenue of just like spending one session on that. Like, so I've been doing fairly, I would say, rigorous, high quality psychotherapy for about a year and a half, 2 years now, and and so even now, as an example, like, it's a lot of stuff in the past, and a lot of stuff in the present as it relates to the past. I'd say more often it's like I've never had any interest of going in the past. The past is, there's painful stuff or boring stuff. Like, what's the point? But it's occurred to me as just very important and critical. Like, it's not fun. I don't like going back to like that really hard moment in grade 5 when I was, whatever. But it struck me as like, oh, that's sort of a necessary thing I have to do. And especially with the work with the psychedelics coming in as well, that takes you sort of in the past, oftentimes. Although not the last trip was all about my present reality, but the first two was always looking back into the past and seeing where my mind was sculpted by various things happening in life, painful things happening in life. But even now, it's interesting. You mentioned self love, self worth, and recently it's occurred to me. Recently in psychotherapy, again, I've been doing it for about 2 years, about once a week, on and off. Having done it for so long, people have done it much longer than that. But having done for multiple years now, just now I've begun to peel back and start thinking about one dimension of the past that I just haven't even opened yet, which is my self perception, self esteem, and as it relates to bullying in childhood, like that, we've never even talked about that. We've talked a lot about stuff I won't necessarily publicize, but just various struggles growing up that I had. But I've never, but we haven't done like a deep dive into the impact of being viciously bullied as a kid and how that's shaped my self perception. And that sounds like I don't want to go into that. Like, I don't feel like, oh, that sounds fun, but with the process that I'm doing with certain sort of problems I'm running into in my present life with self-esteem, confidence, self-perception, it's sort of become obvious that that needs to be fixed, and there's some kind of error going on there. And self-love and self-compassion is going to be, I think, a big part of my process. And a part of that is going to be going back and understanding how the issues that I have now with low self-esteem or low self-worth, how that happened, and what kind of experiences led to that. And again,
Yeah.
I'm not a psychotherapy expert, but it appears that part of that process is going back through a lens of self compassion and then reprocessing those things. And when you do that, again, I wouldn't say it's fun, but oftentimes it's accompanied with a lot of tears, a lot of emotions. It's very cathartic, and in that catharsis, there's a lot of relief and a lot of just a beautiful moment. And then there's the integration of that. And so that's not like a one session. That's like a 2-3 years. Like this takes a long time type thing. I'm
I
curious if
will,
you
I
disagree or
will,
agree with that.
I would say this in response to that. See, but there are, I mean, again, I'm not saying that I wave a magic wand and that's happening with, no, the example that I gave with the lady in her 60s, I wanted to just show people that really all it requires is that instant where everything clicks into place and you understand how to think, how to act, and how to emote in this moment, no matter what your past has happened. That is the pivoting that needs to happen internally. Now, for some people, they get to that point of understanding in an instant. Some people, it takes a long time. So that's why I say healing happens in an instant. Recovery can happen in an instant. But what leads to that instant? It can be 6 months, it can be 10 years, it can be lifelong. But there are ways that we can shorten that process. It's by keeping the focus in the present moment. You cannot be in the past, you cannot be in the future. And that's what I'm saying. Also, I will say this, see, because I have a more of a specialty practice, many of the patients that are coming to me, they have seen other psychiatrists, they've seen other therapists, and they've experienced some sort of this kind of a thing. They understand many of them know that they've had trauma, all of those things. And so there you could say that they were prepped a little bit to doing this. So maybe it's easier for them to just barf out everything that's happened once, and then we get to work. We get to doing some real hard work. And what is the hard work? Is to regulate your nervous system. Is to learn emotional regulation in the here and now. That's all that is needed for healing. I call it time travel. Going back into the past is time travel. And there are little triggers, very, very minuscule, very subconscious triggers that immediately make us time travel to the past. And I get people to recognize, I mean, sometimes I use these terms. I said, hey, are you on the time travel train now? So get off that train, come back to the present, because that's not gonna. So some of these, and this can only happen with the practice of meditation, which is getting to know.
And we should just put one point here for people who maybe not thought about this as much as we have, which is that I see a ginormous difference. There's completely different things of just going about your day and thinking about something bad in the past, which is like basically no utility, versus either journaling or psychotherapy of like a specific thing and processing it, working through it, whether you're writing it down in a journal, understanding how it impacted you, or with a therapist talking about it. Like I see those two things as very different. In both cases, you're going in the past, but if you're just ping ponging in your head, oh my God, that thing happened, oh that sucked, and oh that's totally different than, okay, let's talk about it, let's understand what happened in the past, or let's write about it in a journal. But before we go on to the questions in a sec, just curious, any specific thoughts about what I said about the necessity that I'm sort of intuitively seeing, and maybe I'll be proven wrong on this in the future, of like, oh, maybe there's a quicker way of doing what I'm trying to do, of improving my life, better relationships, better mental health, whatever. But this necessity that I'm sensing at this moment right now of going back in the past and then processing those things, which takes a long time and is very difficult to do.
It's not about processing the past. I mean, the past can only give you only a limited insight. See, the more you're trying to, you see, basically when what you're saying, and if I'm understanding you correctly, and also I do want to preface this by saying that I'm not against psychotherapy. I mean, like I said, healing, whatever happens in an instant, there are many people that have helped many patients along the way, and all of that will click in a little bit until then they get to that point where everything fits in, and then they have that aha moment, and of course healing happens in that instant. And a therapist's success is, one, depends on the relationship, the quality of the interpersonal relationship that you're able to establish, and next, how quickly are you able to create this kind of pivotal moments or aha moments that you can create, that those kinds of insights which which absolutely has to lead to change in thinking, action, and emotion. If that doesn't happen, then therapy is not working. That's all I'm saying. And I know many good therapists who are excellent at doing these things. So I'm not against psychotherapy at all. But what I'm trying to tell you is that it's not about going into the past and reprocessing the past. That's
Mm-hmm.
not what needs to happen. It's about recognizing that that past is holding you in the present moment. And it's
Mm-hmm.
about breaking that hold, because that's
Right.
what's happening.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
What you're saying is that I am this way today because of what happened in my childhood. I am this way because of that severe bullying that happened in my childhood. No doubt about that. But what you're saying is that you're basically saying my hands are tied, my legs are
Mhm.
tied,
Yeah.
my legs are tied. And I'm saying that is an illusion. Because where is the past? Where is the past?
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree on the sort of meditative, mystical approach. Yeah,
No, it's not. It's not mystical. It's not. No,
but
no. The
you
only,
don't have to use those words.
only
No, but I agree. No, I know what you're saying about the primacy of the present moment and the illusion of past and the future. I just did a meditation retreat a couple days ago on Saturday last
okay.
week, which
Yeah.
is really good.
Yeah. So the only change can happen in the present moment. And when you master the present moment, which is what do I mean by master your present moment? How you're thinking, how you're feeling, what choices you're making, and what experiences you're going to have because of the choices that you make. That is mastery of the present moment. If you can master this present moment, you've mastered your life, because you cannot master your past and you cannot master your future.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You can only master, and this present moment, even 2 seconds ago, that's gone. It's only
Yeah.
this now. This is all that we can master.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with you there, and and this is really interesting. I'm liking this because I'm curious if I'm thinking about it in a bit of a wrong way, or if like where we actually disagree with this. But like I'm agreeing with you on the present moment stuff, but there's this reality which, and so I started my sort of self discovery process with meditation a few years ago, and non duality, mindfulness meditation, things like that. And I still do that, and I think that's one of the most important things to do, maybe the most important thing to do. But at the same time, the thing, like what I get from psychotherapy and meditation, they're not opposite things, and they should work together. But they're fundamentally they're just doing different things, and I think there's this reality that while what you're saying is true, like all you really have is this moment to live in, and that's something that unfortunately in Western society most people don't realize, and you have to actually experience that in different ways. And I've experienced that in meditation, and actually critically
No, no,
in
actually,
right.
so what's happening is that if you're not living the present moment with intention and with awareness, then you are living your present moment as a victim of the past. You're reliving your past in the present. So that's why I tell, leave the past in the past. If you're not choosing to be present and aware in this moment, then you are operating from the past.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I'm agreeing with you, and I'm curious if you disagree with this view that I have, which is that it seems to me that in terms of like meditation, like, so one thing I was talking to a friend the other day about, which is that meditation, mindfulness is, I think, a necessary foundation for well-being and flourishing and mental health. But when it comes to actually changing your behavior, meditation doesn't do that. It can help with that. It's the foundation to do that, but I don't think it does that in the sense of I've I would say maybe meditated the last 5 6 years, and being mindful, being aware is critical. But then there's this question: okay, I'm mindful of these obsessive thoughts, these irrational anxieties. I wrote a whole page about them, but how, changing that and where it came from. That's kind of where psychotherapy comes in. And so I like what you just
Why
said.
are you
What, but
parsing it so?
let me just finish. Like what you were saying about how the past, you have to let go of the past and be more in the present moment. It appears to me that letting go of the past is not as easy as just meditating your way through it. It's the unconscious programming of the past, right? This happened to me, this thing in childhood, bullying, failed marriages, failed relationships, whatever it is. It occurs to me that understanding the way the script has been written for your life and understanding different things that were maybe out of your control or was difficult to control, or maybe you just messed up. Lots of cases like that where it's like, man, I really wish I did something better there, and I really messed up, and I feel really bad about it, and I have all the shame and guilt that I'm carrying. And so it occurs to me that it's like you're kind of, Gabor Mate uses the analogy of the puppet, and the puppet is being pulled by all these different things. And it occurs to me that meditation is a big part of it, but meditation alone, as in meditation meaning just being mindful, being aware, isn't alone to cut the strings off the puppet and how it's being controlled. I think that's where there's a necessity for the psychotherapeutic project, which is of understanding how the script for the movie of your life has been written, either in part yourself or in ways that you were impacted and hurt. And so there's this there's an interesting paradox there of like, the more you understand the way you've been hurt or impacted by the past, again, and including your own mistakes and other mistakes maybe your parents made or your friends made or your teachers made or whatever, through that you actually gain like a higher level of agency than if you were ignoring the past and if you were just sort of trying to live in the present moment. Like there's like a greater awareness or a greater power I think you gain by understanding how the past has impacted you. And that seems to be a very arduous, sort of difficult process.
Let me ask you this. So when you're in the present moment and you become aware that you're getting triggered emotionally, whatever, and this is, oh, and then you go into, oh, this is because that happened to me in the past, and you're intellectually going over all of that. Is that, and then that has to give rise to a change in whatever. Or if you become aware, oh, I'm doing this. And okay, if I don't want to do this, and if I continue to do this, if I continue to overthink along these lines, that's going to bring my mood down and it's going to ruin my day. So what can I do? All in the present moment, right now, I catch myself thinking this. Okay, I'm going to take a deep breath and I'm going to not do what I typically do, which is overthink. I'm going to call up a friend
Yeah.
and not talk about this, talk about something else. Or I'm going to watch a cat video to lighten my mood. And then, or I'm going to take my dog out for a walk. So, which is more arduous and which gives you a result right in that moment?
I think both things are important. So what you're saying is amazing, and so I do that. But I won't go, and we should move on in a couple minutes here. But but in terms of if I want to use an example, like broadly speaking, the reasons why I've been exploring mental health, meditation, psychotherapy, psychedelics, all these things I'm exploring now, more and more things like nutrition and sunlight and just all aspects of mental health, is because the sort of feeling a lack of agency over certain behaviors, emotions, feelings. And so the first step of my journey, and it's an ongoing step, we're not done here, was meditation. And so being mindful, becoming aware. But that alone was not, it was not changing the behavior patterns. And so then psychotherapy, psychedelics, that's come into it. And now I'm adding on the sort of Joe Dispenza future authoring, create your future self, nervous system stuff as well. But but the feeling there is that, you use a particular example. I'll speak very broadly here, but my issues with self-esteem that I've sort of been uncovering recently, changing that in the present moment is just, it feels impossible. Like there's things that I am doing for that, and mindfulness, taking a deep breath, seeing what's happening, watching it, like that's all very important and necessary. But that issue feels so deeply rooted that it just doesn't feel like a thing that can be changed in the present moment. Like it's just really that issue I've been struggling with since kindergarten for a number of ways. And so that's where like there's like a sort of changing from self-criticism or sort of brute force into self-compassion, which is like a skill that I've been learning in psychotherapy, of instead of, and it's weird, and I've really struggled with this, and my therapist is pretty awesome in trying to in trying to sort of rewire these connections. Like there's a sense of like, man, I really hate this thing about myself, but I can't stop doing it. And it's really hard, like this behavior, this emotion is really hard to overcome, and I hate it. And so then he'll come in and then he'll be like, let's view it through self-compassion. And then I've had a few sessions that have been very cathartic, where it's been like, oh my God, like this is really difficult. And then I say, like, man, part of me feels really bad, and I want to extend some compassion to that part. I want to sort of empathize with that part. But another part of me, a sort of hyper rational part, which is there sort of all the time. And so it's kind of retraining that part. That part is sort of like, no, we need to punish you for this. You made some really bad mistakes, and you're making bad mistakes, and sort of like a very critical Indian sort of immigrant sort of mentality of like, you got to punish, the kid to act a certain way. And I'm like, I don't feel like giving compassion to this part. And so it's this sort of rewiring process that's very difficult to do in the moment. And my default is self-criticism, self-hatred, guilt, shame, things like that. And that's very hard to reprogram. And so that's where I'm
So
not sure if
firstly,
I'm not sure if you're going to disagree with this, but that's where being in the
it's not
moment and
about
meditation
disagreeing
alone
with that.
is not really a solution to those
It's
deeply
not
entrenched
about
behavior patterns.
disagreeing. First of all, I want to say that thank you for your vulnerability. I think we didn't expect to go here, but we are here
No,
for
this is
whatever
great. I
reason.
love it.
Yeah, and I really, really thank you for your vulnerability in sharing all of this. And my response to that, again, what's working for you, and all of that is do what is working for you. That's not what I'm.
Yeah.
Again, it almost seems as if I'm against psychotherapy. I can see that, but that's not what I'm saying at all. I think the point I'm trying to make, even in these examples that you're giving. So when you talk about, like for instance, when let's say that you're picking up any game, like I used to practice Bharatanatyam, Indian classical dance,
Oh,
and one of the
my
ways that
mom and sister did that for a while. Yeah.
yeah. So I would mentally rehearse before I would actually physically practice. And we do that. I mean, a lot of elite athletes, or people, you mentally see yourself doing it, right? The going through the motions of it, and all of that. And then, but that mental rehearsal is nothing but meditation. And in that process of so meditation is many, many different things. It's a very broad term. And that mental rehearsal will actually lay down neuronal connections, which will make it easy for your body to follow through. So this can be about, and there are multiple responses I can give you for your self-criticism. So there's a part of you that's the bad guy, and you're struggling, your egoic mind, your higher self has no problem accepting the light and dark side of you. It's your egoic mind. It's that egoic mind, that you could call it super ego, a Freudian term, but in more modern spiritual psychology, it's the ego mind. It's not the true self, the higher self. It's the ego mind that's highly critical and controlling, and all these super critical of you, of this part of you that is quote unquote bad. The way I would resolve it is ask you to be bad.
Mm.
So what?
Yeah, I've thought a bit about that. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, keep going.
Accept it. Accept that badness. So the good part of you. Now, when you think about the good side of you, is your egoic mind having any conflict about that?
No.
Why?
Because it feels good.
It's an agreement.
Yeah.
It's an agreement with that. It feels, it accepts that, right? Whereas the bad part of you, there is no acceptance, there is no agreement. So that's why they're butting heads. So get your egoic mind to shake hands with your bad part and let your bad part exist. So you say, and when the criticism comes up, yeah, I did that. Yeah, I was mean. I can be selfish. I can be whatever.
Okay.
I can be impulsive. Just sit with it. And those emotions that come in, breathe through it. Stay with those emotions. Don't escape.
Yeah, so I've done a lot of this. But yeah, keep going. But yeah, so and my therapist is very good at encouraging that. It's like, and again, what I was telling you earlier, you're directly responding to that, right? There's the if you had said what you just said a year ago, I would just flat out just think what you're saying is ridiculous, because it's like, well, but how is that going to change and I still, to a degree, am working and thinking about this, but like, how is just loving that part going to change? Like, it's bad, like it does bad things, right? So it's
I asked you to love that part. I have not yet asked you to love that part. I've said, just accept that you can be bad.
Accept it.
That's a relief. I mean, see, we are forever fighting against the idea. That's the shadow work, but we all have shadows. That's the, I mean, when you talk about non-duality, it is the integration of light and dark. And that integration of light and dark cannot happen by suppressing the dark. Then you're only half alive. The darkness has every right to exist as much as the lightness.
Okay. So it's okay. So self-compassion, accepting the part, and then
Let this sink in, and then
yeah,
let it mull over. I mean, so many of my another patient today, she was telling me that she's hearing from the front, but I enter from the back of her head, and it comes up in some other. So let it mull over this and see how it shows up. But that's the self-awareness part. So the next time you catch yourself, but also when you're meditating, rehearse. Because when you're meditating, you're going into your subconscious mind. You were programmed one way. Now you're entering into your operating system, which is your subconscious mind. Program yourself to be more self-compassionate. Program yourself to be more accepting of yourself. And again, I will go back to the first thing. If anybody is having OCD and overthinking, clean up your diet. 40% of your obsessiveness will go just with that.
Yeah. And then when it comes to speaking broadly here, whatever one's bad part is, whatever one wants to change about their life, you're saying by becoming aware, extending self-compassion, understanding it, reprogramming it, like is there
I haven't said any of that. I've just said just be bad and be okay with being bad. That's all. I'm not asking you. Those are all your words that you're saying.
Well, I'm reading between the lines, and that's sort of that's an inference.
I haven't even said that because that comes later. You first have to be okay with being bad.
Yeah.
I mean, even I think even Jesus said, right? Whoever has never sinned, throw the first stone. What that does mean? We all carry light and dark within us.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the human nature.
Yeah.
Nobody's, even the light side of you, the supercritical egoic mind, the holier than thou part of you has no business being holier than thou.
Yeah. Okay, so obviously we could spend hours talking about this, but so briefly, you said other stuff comes later. So briefly spell out someone who wants to change their whatever impulsive behavior or whatever. Like,
so what happens in the kind of work that I'm doing? And again, I have to emphasize the importance of nutrition and detoxification and managing inflammation. That is the bedrock of this, because to do this kind of work, it takes a lot of physical and mental effort, for which you do need all of this. So then with the frame shifts, and so you've had a frame shift today with me, with the pivoting that I'm doing for you, what will happen? And if it has landed, and it may not land for some people, and that's okay too. So there will be, so if I'm working with somebody, one-on-one, then different scenarios come up from their life, and then we have this back and forth exchange where I'm trying to get them to see how they can shift or pivot within their own mind. And then what happens, see, much of therapy happens not in the therapist session, it happens outside of the therapist session, right? So in your everyday life, you catch yourself and something clicks in, and you have to show up differently than you would normally do. Otherwise, it's just intellectual exercise, and we are just having a conversation. That does no one any good. You have to implement it. You have to show up differently. And that showing up differently, again, happens only in the present moment. But the more you do that, one is a mental rehearsal during meditation, or when you're just contemplating. Rather than contemplating about the past, how about, okay, the next time somebody calls me selfish, this is how I'm going to respond to that. Or next time I feel emotionally aroused, this is how I will respond to that. You rehearse that. You lay down the neuronal structure in your brain. And then when the opportunity shows up, then see, otherwise, again, this is not my quote. I saw this on Instagram one day, and it was a very funny thing. Apparently, this guy's working with a shaman, and this person's also doing a lot of this purging of trauma, old memories, past. And the shaman finally told him, how long are you going to sit on the toilet? Because as long as you're purging, you're basically on the toilet, and life happens outside of the toilet. So that was something that resonated with me, because obviously my thinking is kind of the same. So yes, bad things happen to us. I mean, it's not only in the past, it will continue to happen.
Yeah.
What we need to learn is emotional resiliency, the non-attachment. And it's a game, the concept of Leela, this is all a play. And that wholeness. So again, so accept that you're bad. So what?
Yeah, well, certain things happen. Things happen in life that are not good. Then,
Yeah, it has happened.
yeah,
It has happened.
yeah. Well, I'm even saying just
As
future,
long
right?
as you're responding intellectually, you're not connecting emotionally. So a lot of this is about your body. So when you accept that you're bad, you get all these, all these impulses to to rationalize or to excuse or to defend. That has to stop, and you just feel it. You just feel it, breathe, let those emotions come in. And you don't have to, again, when this work is done in the right way, you're not doing it all the time. That's where the power of this work, because of that. And similar things can happen with ayahuasca, with ibogaine, with the proper psychedelic treatments as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I know
yeah,
psychedelics has been brought up, and I have not tried any psychedelics myself.
yeah,
And as I mentioned even in the last podcast, my thing is that a lot of this work can be done without psychedelics as well. And when psychedelics can also be helpful for this kind of work, but it's not about what's happening in the psychedelic experience. It's about what's happening before and what's happening
yeah.
after.
Well, it's all the above. But yeah, the integration is
Yeah,
critical.
the integration
But
is very, very
yeah,
critical.
let's put a finer point on that in a second. But I will say, just to wrap up that whole discussion, which is great, is that yeah, what you just described is a very uh yeah, what you've described there is something I've done multiple times with my therapist, and what you just said again, it's about the body, not the mind. And so that's been a very interesting area of growth and continual growth of what I already said at the start before you started talking was about struggling with these certain things and those emotions coming up, and then the hyper rational part being like, no, we got to punish this. There's no point of extending acceptance or compassion or love or whatever. It's we have to punish ourselves. So and those experiences, and then we've a few experiences where my therapist and I, kind of my idea was like, okay, let's we've done it that way for a long time. I think that's something he said. He's like, okay, you've been self-critical for a long time and you've hated that part. Let's just for an hour, let's just let that go. And I'm like, with some training in mindfulness, I was like, yeah, we can let it go for an hour. Okay, it's gonna come up. Let's just let it go for an hour, and then there's a very cathartic experience, and very very interesting to see that play out. And there's some interesting paradoxes there of like sometimes to change something that's not good, you kind of have to be good to it. You have to kind of accept and love or extend some compassion to it. Whereas, like you sort of think of it rationally, you want to punish it, you want to like get rid of something, right? If someone does something bad, right, you want to put them in jail, right? If someone commits a crime, but that doesn't really work when it comes to the internal landscape, and that maybe doesn't even work sort of externally too. And I we won't go down this rabbit hole now, but people who listen to Joe Rogan, he's talked about several times, and I agree with him. He's like, what if we're painting, if President Joe Rogan or President someone who's like really interested in mental health is like, a better system we would have is people who've committed horrible crimes like rape, homicide, theft, burglary, terrorism, like all kinds of things. Is like if you had Joe talks about like if you had in prison like rigorous psychedelic therapy, so that with this understanding of like putting people in prison is not actually leading them to self transformation. It's necessary in the sense that we have to keep bad guys away who are killing people or doing whatever. But when it comes to actually changing behavior and creating self transformation, just putting people in prison is not the way, unfortunately. And many people who come out of prison, they go back into prison too. We know that is a problem as well. So hopefully in 100 years or 200 years, or hopefully sooner, there's a better way of compassionately dealing with people who have done very bad things, like committing homicide, which everyone agrees is horrible. But how do you actually change that person's psyche, and how does that person process that other than just going to jail, right?
Yeah, but I mean, on the concept of breaking the bond with the past, and the overthinking and all of that, I think two very very helpful strategies. And sometimes I do this. I send people for EMDR and brain spotting, eye movement desensitization
Hmm.
retraining
Yeah, I have friends
treatment,
doing that.
which is, yeah, and brain spotting. Both of them are time limited. They are 6 to 8 sessions at the most, and studies have shown that they can both be very effective in breaking this bond with the past. And that there's a neurological basis for that as well, for both brain spotting and EMDR. So I think that's where, and again, obviously we all bring our personality and our biases into everything that we do. And for me, I've definitely seen that there is, you know, life is too beautiful for us to be suffering in it. And if we can learn as quickly as, again, the time is not of essence here, but if I can help somebody find the quick and sure path, to ease their own suffering, then I would. That's what I would be doing. And what I've found from that quest for myself as a physician, and even in my own life, is these practices, which is okay. Can change the past. Yeah, yes. Let's see how that is coming into the present, and let's be anchored, so firmly anchored in the present, that we are
Yeah,
not uprooted by the past.
yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah. And so far, my sense on that whole picture at this point is that we are much more impacted by the past than we think we are, but the way we think about the past does not help in 99% of cases, as in people just going around.
as long as you keep saying that we are much more impacted by the past, and that's, you're actually giving away your power to the past.
Uh, yeah, I see what you're saying, but I feel like that's true. That, like, whether you want to ignore it or accept it, that we are heavily impacted by the past, by how we were raised, how we were parented, things like that. But I think the sort of higher, or maybe even the highest level of agency or freedom that one might attain in this life is acknowledging and understanding all of that, and then operating better in the world, as opposed to, yeah, it's hard to articulate this, but it's like, yes, you know it's like, there's power in saying things like, and believing, like, and I do believe this, of like, this moment is fresh, and I can act in this moment how I want. And actually, that was actually the biggest insight of my MDMA therapy session last year. My last time I did psychedelics, last January, was like, it was actually agency. It was like, I've not been living my life according to how I want to. I keep living to some standard set by, whatever.
Anybody else?
And so gaining more agency. And so, since the psychedelic trip, the very powerful prompt and integration, which actually has only come more recently, it's taken so long to integrate it, has been asking myself every morning, how do I want to feel like today? What do I want to do today? What kind of experience do I want today? And I never asked myself that question before, but in that psychedelic trip, I did. And that's, you can talk about that scientifically. Psychedelics put you in a very neuroplastic state where you're thinking through things from a different perspective that you
Correct.
hadn't thought about before. And that sounds like a very fundamental question, but that question I never had asked before. And so every morning, even though I'm self-employed, I run my own podcast, I'm my own boss. Every morning I was unconsciously defaulting to the state of like, oh, I have to do these emails, I have to do a podcast, I have to read this book, I have to write. And it's like, even though those are things I want to do, but they turn into this tyrannical have to. I'll send you my article later. I just wrote a whole essay on my trip last year, which you might find interesting. That
Yes.
that prompt of like, now, which I didn't have access to before. And so that's where it's sort of being realistic a little bit. And it's like, I wish I had access to that way of thinking before. And it didn't occur to me till that experience on psychedelics. And now I'm asking myself every day, I go for a morning walk or morning breath work,
Perfect.
morning meditation, of like, how do I want to live like today? And that feels so simple, but I was never asking myself that. I was operating from, I have to do this, I have to do
Yes.
that, I should do this, I should do that.
That's
But now
awareness.
it's like, it's not about actually changing the activities. It's like, I'm still doing the exact same stuff, but operating from a mindset of gratitude and of like, yeah, like I do really want to do this. Actually, I do really want to do this rather than before this weird thing, which is, again, these things are so hard to articulate, right? I was doing the
Correct.
same stuff I was doing before, but I was operating from this sharp inner critic, this like, you have to do this and you suck and you're failing, to now I get to do this and wow, what an amazing life this is. And that's been a pretty
Right.
radical
Yeah.
mental shift. And so that's where, going back to what I was saying, unlocking these patterns of thinking, it's like, and I, you might disagree with this emphasis, but I do feel this is the right,
No,
like
I don't.
I do. Let me just finish. I do think that, like, this might sound very disempowering to people, but there are ways that I know and that I don't know. There are certain mental patterns that I have right now that I don't have, like, that I would like to change, but I don't know how to change yet. And while mindfulness and awareness in this moment of how I want to act is critical, I know there some part of my psyche and my behavior, there's some part of my mental script that needs to change. And that's the process of this, or what Joe Dispenza is doing, or journaling, or psychotherapy, of understanding the mental script. Because the reality about our mind and our brain is that, a lot of things are on autopilot, right? We know that to be true, right? We don't think through everything, and that's sort of a useful thing, right? When we're doing, like, when we're driving, right? Thinking, like, when we were first driving on the highway, you were very alert. Now driving on the highway, you're sort of a bit on autopilot. And now when you're on the highway, you can think about what you're going to do tomorrow, as opposed to when you were first driving, you're like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, right? And so there's this reality, I think, of things that are in sort of our mental, that are in our narrative about our past or future, the way we behave, that I know there are things I'm going to be unlocking in the future, things that I'm going to change, that unfortunately isn't just a matter of right now, like it is right now, but it's also like a, let's start journaling, let's start exploring with therapy or psychedelics or whatever, and unpacking the mental script, which is very hard to get to, because oftentimes that's sort of in the subconscious, that's in the unconscious. And so you need tools like what you described, which take some training. And I'm still learning how to, what Joe Dispenza is teaching about, actually in the meditation, starting to rewire and starting to create a future, a
Correct.
future you, a future
In
self that you
fact,
want.
his morning meditations, actually, those that's the script that's there in his morning and evening meditations that he has on sale on his website. That's exactly the script, the questions that you're asking after your psychedelic trip. That's exactly the script that he uses for his morning and evening meditation. So in the morning, how do I want to be today? What kind of thoughts do I want to have? What kind of actions I want to take? What kind of emotions I want to feel? And then the evening meditation is more of a review. Well, how did I do today? Where did I fall from grace? Where did I do good? And how can I be better tomorrow? So that's the reprogramming. That's the subconscious reprogramming that can happen when you are in that meditative alpha wave and theta wave state. So, yeah, good stuff. I mean, I'm really excited for you.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is all just about, and I was gonna rename my Substack, like, Agency Unbound, or Unlocking Agency. I've named it to the Meta Mystic, but I'm very interested in human freedom and agency, and like living, like shortening the distance between who you want to be and who you are. Like, that's kind of like, if you want to sort of summarize it in a fun way, that's sort of like, I want to be this way, but I'm not this way. How do we get to that place quicker and faster, and how do we live in that place? And that's hard, right? That's not an easy thing to do, but there's better and worse ways, and I'm still exploring better and worse ways of doing that. And it occurs to me, part of that picture, part of gaining freedom and agency, is learning how you have been handcuffed and how you might still be handcuffed, which is like, that's kind of the paradox of how you've been impacted, right? And then understanding that, and then unlocking that, and then figuring out a new way to behave. So that's like, I think that's kind of part of the game, I feel like. I don't know.
Okay.
Um,
So,
this has been really good. I'm wondering, should we wrap this up now and then do the Q&A another time, whether tomorrow or next week? And like this is just a great conversation, and I can title
I
this.
know. Yeah, I think we
Is that
went over time with this. Yeah.
Do you think you want to do that, or should we run through in half an hour quickly the questions? What I'm personally leaning towards doing the Q&A next time, so we do some of those questions
Yeah,
justice.
I think,
But
yeah.
if you're limited on time or something, and can't make time next week, then we can just do it now. So
I
it's
think I should be able to make some time for next week, but
okay.
today let's just. I think, I mean, we again, I really appreciate your vulnerability in sharing many of the things that you're working on and going through and all of that. And um, yeah, it's not easy to do that. And I mean, if it was helpful to listeners to see how we can overcome some of these binds, and the way that we can knot ourselves in or bind ourselves in, and how we can come out of that. If it was helpful, then I think that's a good use of our conversation.
No, I think this has been a great discussion, and just your I I don't think we're fundamentally disagreeing on anything. I think we have different emphasis.
Yeah.
But I to close here, are you seeing eye to eye on me, or agreeing with me on the point about agency? Is that a lot of people, like, we're
In fact, my
like
emphasis
both
is
sides of
on
the picture
agency.
of that, of the importance of emphasizing that you can exercise freedom and agency in this moment, but also recognizing that our agency and our freedom is hampered and has been impaired in some cases, or in depending on whatever it is, but is oftentimes has been impaired by the past and the way we were.
Yes, I mean, where I am in my life and in my journey personally also, and even as a physician and a psychiatrist, I'm leading more towards showing people how to get to that place of self agency and freedom in the shortest and quickest way, most effective way possible. That's where I am. I'm again in anything. I don't think I'm fundamentally disagreeing with what you're saying. Yes, that's why trauma is a big piece of the three root causes I talk about. That's center stage actually. But the way I think my emphasis is more on creating. Yes, that took away your self agency, but you are able to create that agency, and these are the steps to do that. And every time you are going back into the past, pivot back into the present, and operate from a place of self agency. And it's retraining yourself again and again and again.
Yeah,
So
and
I'm
you're
not
talking about
disagreeing
ordinary.
with you.
You're talking about daily life, like when if you're going into past and just overthinking about stuff, then
Yes, yeah.
pivoting to the present moment. But like I was saying,
Like I said,
doing it
therapy
in a controlled
happens
setting is very
outside
different.
of the sessions. Like I said,
Yeah,
therapy happens out the healing and the therapy, all of that, because that's the outcome metric for any successful treatment in the field of mental health, right? Is how is this person able to live outside of the sessions? So it's not so much what happens, and that's where my emphasis is on training people. It's a training program. It's a retraining and rewiring of the brain and retraining of the body to think, act, and emote in a different manner. And that's my emphasis is on that. I don't think it's a disagreement, but my emphasis is on, if like even with you, I think subconsciously, automatically, not subconsciously, automatically, that's what I was doing. You're going back and I'm trying to pivot you back here. That's what I end up doing. And it's a process that most of my patients learn to do outside of sessions as well. It's with the process of self-awareness and seeing, oh yeah, I'm doing that thing again. Okay, how can I think differently about the same situation? How can I act differently, and how can I feel differently about the same situation? Like going back to that example, somebody calls you selfish. I mean, you can get angry. Oh, but how can that would be from the past? But hey, how can I think and act and feel differently, even though I'm being called selfish in this moment? And that pivoting is what creates change. And
yeah,
when change has happened, we call that healing. And when it
yeah,
becomes automatic for you, for the
yeah.
client,
No,
it becomes
I
automatic.
yeah, I like what you're saying there. But just from my personal experience, I also see the value, like in that hypothetical case, the value of someone who, for whatever reason, is getting triggered by that allegation, to deep dive into like what's going on there and what kind of experiences and what's in the unconscious there. Maybe it's as a kid they wanted to have fun and their mom was very disciplined or something, and every time the kid wanted to have fun and the mom was like, "Oh, you're being selfish," and that's like a wound there. And so I see, and again,
See, but actually,
I'm happy to be proven wrong on some things like this, and
no, it's not that.
I'm experiencing things like this, and so I'm open to changing my perspective every day. But I see, from what I understand, I see there's some utility in like going back to that and unlocking where that
But
wound
it's
was
not.
created, and then
Let me
in
try this.
self-compassion, and then having a
Let me
cathartic
try this
experience, and
pivoting
then
for you.
letting go
See,
of it.
let me try this pivoting for you.
Yeah.
That happened in your child. Let's say that actually happened in childhood. You were, as you described. And that's why you react to that word being called selfish. But it's actually not what happened in childhood. It's that you agree with that. So that's
Yeah.
why I'm saying
Yeah.
consciously accept and agree. Yeah, maybe I was selfish.
Mhm.
And wait for those feelings and accept those feelings of shame, of badness, and be okay with that. That is where, then you will be able to kind of,
Yeah.
because it's not about what happened in the past, it's what we internalized.
Yeah. Yes. More precisely said. Yes. Although in this hypothetical, I was using the hypothetical where it wasn't your fault. You just wanted to have you just wanted to have fun as a kid. Obviously, there's examples where you fucked up, and then it's like the shame and the guilt. In this example, I was using of like, oh, this was just your parent made a bad decision there and did not treat you well. And so in that case, the utility, just to summarize it briefly, from just a personal experience side, the utility that I've sensed from doing that is like, you have a certain behavior, you feel stuck, you feel angry and concerned about that behavior, and so I like what you're saying about accepting that, acknowledging that, but then sort of going back and understand, like the understanding piece, right? Because that's kind of what we're getting at, is the word understanding, of like, oh, in this hypothetical, when I was a kid, every time I wanted to have fun and play sports or whatever, I wanted to dance around, listen to music, my mom was like, no, you got to study better and get get A pluses on everything. It's like going back to that. It's like, oh, there's like a wave of self compassion that comes, like, oh, now I understand why I'm getting triggered. And then oftentimes, if you're doing it the right way in the right container, a lot of tears, a lot of catharsis comes through that, and then there's less of an anger, less of hostility towards that part. And that's where what you said, then the mental shift of like, how can I now think differently? I understand where this is coming from, and so I'm no longer confused or like paralyzed, like, why is this happening, because that's kind of the sense of, like, one way of framing the psychotherapy is that most people, they are struggling with a certain problem, and even if they're thinking a lot about their past, which is most people, they're sort of frozen in time, and they're sort of struggling with a problem now, but they don't really understand how they got to that problem and what experiences or what traumas led to that. And so therapy done right is understanding how that happened, understanding, oh, this is how it happened, and that's often accompanied with a lot of self-love and self-compassion, actually, because then
Yeah.
you blame yourself, you hate yourself less.
Correct. Yeah. So, and again, even what I'm doing is a form of psychotherapy. It's just a different style of psychotherapy. So, again, I'm not, I feel like I should clarify that I'm not against any form of psychotherapy. And what I've seen is that it is the quality of the relationship
Yeah.
that really makes the difference. And and people develop their own skill sets, their own style of practicing it. But what the outcome metric is always that, how is the person, is the client or the patient able to create change in their lives outside of the session? That is
Yeah.
the best outcome metric.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and psychotherapy is such a vast term, right? There's just so many
Correct.
things, and I've tried different things, and there's different things for different problems too. And so, what I'm sort of describing to you here, by the way, is this is internal family systems, and that's kind of a fancy term. And Dr. Andrew Huberman just did a whole podcast with the founder of IFS, but it's basically just a methodology for uncovering different parts of yourself that you have. It's fairly intuitive. It's not esoteric. It's just like, oh, you have this obsessive part, or this angry part, or this anxious part that comes out, and so sort of diving deep into how that came to be. But it's like for different, like for working through debilitating anxiety and psychosomatic issues, that was a process of using the fancy term they use for it is pain reprocessing therapy. For people who have debilitating chronic pain, for me, was debilitating chronic chest pain and debilitating acid reflux and gastroesophageal reflux disease. And so I did the pain reprocessing therapy, which was founded by people like Alan Gordon and Howard Schubiner, some who have interviewed on the podcast. And that's a very different thing. That's a process of, oh, you have this pain in your body, and after you've ruled out physical causes, although that gets complicated too, because sometimes, as you've talked about, toxins and diet, there's things that your family doctor, your family doctor might say, "Oh, you're fine, there's no problem,"
Yeah,
but
that's yeah.
someone like you who's has a deeper understanding could point out, "Oh, this chemical, this food is, whatever." But
Anytime there
but
is pain, irrespective of where it is coming from, it's inflammation. So you've got heat in your body, and you got to cool that down. And yes, of course, the way you think contributes to that heat.
yeah,
I mean, overthinking, people can actually feel that their head is getting hot.
yeah,
We see that connection.
yeah,
So anytime there is pain, anytime there is any physical symptom, I actually don't believe in the term psychosomatic anymore. To me, mind and body are one. Mind, body, and soul are one entity, and any balance or imbalance will show up in all these three levels of the same entity. It's
yeah,
all just one entity,
yeah,
and you cannot so the imbalance will always. It doesn't matter. Diabetes will also have a mind component and a soul component there. It's, again, even in diabetes too, I can, what do I mean by that? I could explain it as somebody who is, choosing to eat, they're diabetic and they're still not choosing to eat right for their disease, for their health, are at the soul level, they're operating from a place of lack of honoring their own needs, and constantly hurting themselves. And at the mental level, it can be not being able to overcome the craving, and it can, again, all of this can happen from trauma as well. And at the physical level, it's manifesting as diabetes. So I don't see any difference between mind, body, and soul. It's just that it's like, okay, it's showing up in this way at the level of the body, it's showing up in this way at the level of the mind. And so psychosomatics, I actually don't even use that term in my own language,
yeah.
in my own
No, yeah,
language.
yeah, yeah. This is just what you're pointing to is the inherent limitation of language. So, like, I agree with you 100% about the interconnected nature of everything. That's different religions speak to that in beautiful ways, like Hinduism. But uh, obviously, we're operating in the realm of duality and discrimination, as in we have to discriminate between different things. And so, for me, the psychosomatic term does offer a lot of utility. And so, in my case, and we'll go after this now, is that I went to my Ayurvedic doctor and I was having chronic acid reflux, left side chest pain, and I was having extreme hunger pains. I couldn't go more than an hour without eating, and
Oh,
this
wow.
was after this sort of traumatic experience that I had, and this lasted for months and months. So I went to my Ayurvedic doctor, and then we put on all these supplements, changes to the diet, cleaned that all up, but it still didn't. The left side chest pain was still 10 out of 10. Digestion was a little bit better, so there were some supplements that kind of helped in certain areas. But and that's where, and my doctor already knew this too, and so he like when I talked to him after, he's like, I knew your problem was 95%, something like that, was your anxiety and your fear patterns. And so, but that's when the what they call the pain reprocessing therapy, or the psychosomatic uh realm of research, and some of these guys, Yoni Asher, Howard Schubiner, Alan Gordon, they've written great books on this. Their work, which is just essentially reprocessing in the moment your perception of fear and anxiety to safety and calmness. And so that was just the way out for me, was, changing from, oh my god, I have a digestion problem, oh my god, the left side of my chest is hurting all the time, and this all unconscious patterning of, oh my god, it sucks, it hurts, I'm worried, what if I die, what if I have a heart attack, what's wrong in my digestion, the doctors can't find it. Like, changing that to okay, the pain is there, let's just feel it through a sense of safety and calmness and breathe through it. And that's very
Yeah.
hard. That's not a one and done. That took maybe 7-8 months of doing that constantly. And so now
Mm.
I'm happy to report, like, that was, I've sort of retrained my mind. And so now maybe once a month something will happen, digestion might go off, or some anxiety comes up over something, but now I know how to deal with it and ground myself and process that in the moment through a lens of safety. And so, but that's, to my earlier point, that was a very different project than the sort of more deeper psychotherapy stuff that I'm still doing, of uncovering the unconscious patterning of my behavior and my emotions. Now I'm working through a lot of self-esteem and self-worth issues, and working through that. So there's a lot of different tools for different jobs. And I,
Correct. Yeah.
I wish things were simpler. I wish there was just like, oh, just do this one meditation program, or take this one dose of psilocybin, and then you're done. But it's like, life is hard, and there's different things for different situations, and you just gain more knowledge.
Yeah, I can tell you that, especially before I switched over to being a holistic psychiatrist, I used to operate from that lens of almost hopelessness, like especially with certain diagnoses. And at that, in my spiritual growth, more in my spiritual growth, I began to realize that there is no need for me to feel afraid or hopeless for on behalf of the patients, because especially if I diagnose somebody with bipolar or schizophrenia, because those are the big scary psychotic illnesses. That was a big thing that I had to give up, is that fear, even as a physician treating them. And a lot of it is really about the stories that we build in our minds about these things. So um, as much as possible, if we approach every moment with a clean slate, that's the practice of being in the present and in the now. The more we get to that, where we are every moment in time, we are approaching as if it's a fresh moment with no previous baggage, it becomes easier, and it gives us more agency that way.
Yeah,
So I think in conclusion, I think I want to say that I don't think we are essentially disagreeing on any of these topics that we have discussed. I don't think there is a disagreement per se, but it's the
different
viewpoint
experiences.
and the approaches are a little bit different. And yeah, and like I said, I've with like I've the way I've organized even my program from gut health and inflammation and handling the detoxification, that comes first, because I've definitely seen that that does help with a more smoother transition into the psychotherapy, self-worth, and all of those things. Because yes, you need a healthy body to carry out all of these mental processes and activities, so it makes it easier. And yeah, so I think
Yeah.
that's what I.
Yeah, and last thing I'll say in response to what you just said about hope and moving to a place of hope. One thing I have recognized, and I don't know if I've always had this. I think I've maybe always had a bit of this, but maybe through like my very first psychedelic experience on MDMA in late 2021, when I was like, that was kind of the first time I was exploring mental health stuff. I'd been meditating maybe a couple years before that point, but I'd become so hopeless and so depressed and lonely and isolated, lacking just anything that was good in life other than my career. That experience and maybe in general, and then building up on that, one thing that I um am good at and proud of, and I and now that I see that I have this pattern, this way of thinking. It's easy to see when other people don't have it, and that's sort of interesting to see. Like, oh, you're operating from total hopelessness and sort of this depressive, life sucks, and I'm not going to be able to change this thing. Whereas the thing that I've unpacked with myself, whether it was the psychedelics or whatever integration, or maybe a little bit beforehand too, is this growth mindset. I'm very strong on that. Is like I always like if there's a problem, something I'm struggling with, I sort of have this sense of like this can get better, and I'm going to find out how to make this better. And whether that's doing this or that, whether it's nutrition, therapy, meditation, yoga, exercise, sunlight, psychedelics, whatever it is, we can figure this out and we can overcome this. And so there's never like, even with the things that I'm dealing with right now, the self love, self esteem, and I'm revealing that much, but I'm not going into specifics because that would not be good. It's personal stuff, but even with those things, some of the very deep rooted issues there that I sort of rationally, my mind is like, we're stuck here, but I have this deeper sort of intuitive sense of like, we're going to overcome this and we're going to find out how. I don't know exactly how, but like this thing, like doing the Joe Dispenza course, like seeing things, you learn things, and it's like, okay, I'm going to find the right way, and it's going to be hard and it's going to take time, and acknowledging that that there are limitations and it's not easy. It's going to take, maybe it's going to take longer than I would like. And that's kind of how I feel about it. Things have taken longer to improve than I would have liked early, like in 2021. I was like, oh, maybe we'll have one psilocybin trip and that'll just whatever it'll just fix things. And people often think that way. That's not what happens. But I do have the strong sense of the growth mindset, which I hope more and more people have. And I think your work also encourages that too, of being proactive and not sort of taking no for an answer of like, we're just stuck here, we're hopeless, we're going to figure this out and we're going to go
It's
through it.
more about, it actually is about self agency. It's about self empowerment. self-awareness through, I mean, when I first started thinking about what it is that I'm doing, I'm teaching people self-awareness because that can lead to self-empowerment, getting to know yourself. And that's how um, I teach people how to be self-empowered, which is putting to rest the victim mindset. So that's, and victim mindset, simply put, anytime anytime we feel that what is happening to us or any circumstance that we are in is because of something outside of us, then we are outsourcing that power, that agency to something else. So it's retiring that kind of a mindset and really pivoting and asking, okay, how did I bring this about? What was my role in this? And of course, we can take it to any extent. And looking at things in that manner really gives that self agency and self empowerment. And what was it? I think Viktor Frankl really, in his book Man's Search for Meaning, he really he came up with some very good insights about that. When Viktor Frankl was a psychoanalyst who was imprisoned in the Nazi camp, and he survived. And one thing that he said, even though he was I can't think of anything much worse than being imprisoned in a Nazi camp as a Jewish prisoner. And he came out and out of that experience with his with not being too cynical, and still able to keep his humanity intact. And he said that was because he's quoted with having said this, that between a stimulus and a response, you can take a pause, and that determines, that pause can help you determine what kind of a response that you can give. So that, and I always, in my worst situations, I'm like, oh, Viktor Frankl could do it in that situation. What excuse do I have in mine? Kind of a thing.
Yeah,
So
I like that. Yeah,
yeah.
that's nice. To close here, this has been a great conversation. Some of the things I talked about, for people watching or listening, I'm going to be writing more about this, and I'm excited to write about it. On my Substack, the Meta Mystic, about this paradox of gaining agency, but at the same time acknowledging and understanding ways in which you may have been impacted and not have had the agency in the past to act a certain way potentially. I'm going to be writing a lot about that, and I'm excited to do that. And I'm also going to be doing podcasts coming up with a few people on this, including my friend Matt Johnson, who's very interested in agency, and he's the world's foremost psychedelic researcher right now. So we're going to talk about psychedelics and agency and just continue navigating and exploring this path on the podcast. So I'm excited about that. And Aruna, excited about the partnership that we have going on here. I think if we have the discount code ready, we'll link to it by the time this podcast is out. If not, look for it in the next podcast. And your clinic is Trinergy Health. I mean, if someone's listening right now, you can just go to the website, and you offer a number of services.
Yes.
Do you want to just we'll go into this more, and we're going to be doing ad reads on the podcast to promote what you're doing. But if you want to briefly, to close, just tell people just services you're providing or how to reach out to you quickly. Go for it.
Sure. So it's trinergyhealth.com. I can be reached at 262-955-6601. And there are three main.
That's your number, your work number.
Yeah. 6601, 262-955-6601.
Okay. People can text there. Is that your clinic number or something? Okay.
Yeah, that's the clinic number. They can text, call. The main program obviously is the holistic psychiatry. I call it Psychiatry 2.0. It's a 6-month program for most people, but it's not a set 6 months for everyone. For some it does extend beyond that. And the focus in this program is really about bringing wholeness and integration and healing at the level of the mind, body, and soul. Now, because of the strange times that we're in, the second program that I've actually been working on is and offering it to people is the COVID vaccine injury program, as well as for patients with long haul COVID, because it creates a certain kind of immune system dysregulation that needs a slightly different kind of an approach. That's also, it can be it's structured to be a 6-month program. I do believe that 6 months is good enough time to create the shifts, and not only in thinking, but also in the physiology of the body and the brain, to bring about healing. And the last program that we offer is the Ayurvedic wellness program with our Ayurvedic doctor. So these are the three programs that we offer. And really, we are here to help anybody struggling with any mental or physical illnesses, and even COVID vaccine injuries and long haul COVID patients as well.
Yeah.
And
Excellent.
healing is possible. I mean, in all of these conditions, I'm actually actively working with a 14-year-old documented COVID vaccine injury patient. She developed severe OCD literally 3 days after her second dose of the Pfizer vaccine, which then morphed into psychosis. And she's 14, 15 years old. So, yeah. But healing is possible.
Yeah. I love that mindset. I love that narrative. Although this is where I don't know what to make of this, but obviously there are situations, very late stage cancer where someone does have to go as well, right? That's also part of life.
Yeah.
Where healing is maybe not possible.
Well, my response to that is, especially, as you know, I'm very much into Dr. Dispenza's work, and I have seen, people with end stage cancer heal. I've seen their testimonials directly. I've heard them in the retreats, and I've heard his testimonials. And in December of last year, they posted a testimonial of a 70-year-old woman who regrew her rectum after it was removed for colon cancer or something like that. His work is really breaking the barriers of what we think of as is possible and not possible. And it's really a fascinating time to be alive I think for every one of us. So I will, and the second thing that I will say in response to what your comment is, in Ayurveda too, no disease is exempt from healing, except the only thing that can kind of tells us a poor prognosis is the stage of the disease. That's it. I think you are freezing up, Rav. I don't know if you can. Can you hear me? I don't know. Hi, Rav. I don't know. I think I lost.
Now you're back.
Yeah, I'm back. So I don't know where I cut off, but basically, according to Ayurveda, the prognosis of a disease is not based on the diagnosis of the disease. It really is dependent on the stage of the disease. So we divide, in Ayurveda, we understand disease progression as happening in 6 stages. It's only the 5th and the 6th stages that concept of poor prognosis is entertained because of end stage complications and things like that, end stage organ damage and things like that. But these, every time, I have a concept, it seems to be challenged with real life experiences that I have this way. So, and what I've realized is that, and even, I don't know if you've heard of this person, Anita Moorjani. She's actually written a book called Dying to Be Me. She actually died, had a near-death experience of end-stage cancer, came back from the near-death experience, and she had golf ball-sized tumors on her spine. And within days after her near-death experience, they dissolved within days. And now she has, it's been at least 10 years since this happened. She died, came back, and her tumor dissolved. Her cancer completely went away. And she's alive and well. She's actually a motivational speaker now. She's also very a sought-out motivational speaker, and she talks about these. So these concepts of I'd leave the audience with this. Not.
Yeah, she was fully dead.
She was dead.
Fully dead or near
No,
death?
she was fully dead.
Clinically dead. Yeah, wow.
She was clinically dead with the cancer. And she basically has a near-death experience. Anita Moorjani is her name.
I will independently verify this. This sounds crazy, but I believe that this. I'm assuming she said that, and I hope that's true. Yeah. That would be awesome.
In fact, her book "Dying to Be Me" was co-written by her oncologist, who was flabbergasted. But she could see everything. Like she knew when the communication of the death diagnosis was given to her husband, she saw all that. And so there's a lot of details that she was able to give. But then after she came back, within days, her tumors completely disappeared. They just melted away. So
That's crazy.
yeah, it's a crazy story. So I will leave the audience with this, that don't, I mean, it's, this is the age where this kind of information is becoming more widely known, widely received and accepted. So it's time to break all our preconceived notions about life, about health, about disease, about healing, and all of that. So I think I'll end with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was beautiful. That was a great way to end it. I will continue exploring these things, and maybe in 20 years we can bring back people from the dead. Who knows? I think things are advancing like crazy.
Yes.
Thanks for coming on, and we'll do the Q&A next. So audience, hold tight. We will do it. Don't worry.
We can.
We'll get.
We have some questions, but if there are any other burning questions, I think people can reach out to us. So maybe it's a good thing that we are postponing the Q&A for next week.
Yeah, and the discount code for your clinic, we're still sorting that out. Hopefully, we get that sorted and we can provide that for this podcast, which will be maybe out in a couple days after today, where we're recording it.
Yes.
So we'll work on that, so people can get a special discount for people who watch the podcast and support the show.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Thank you.
Take care.